Thanks. It looks like everyone's sound is working. Brian, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much, and welcome everybody here today. It is absolutely a privilege and an honor to be able to welcome you to this session, which is the starting point of one of my favorite times of the year. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Cognato. I am Senior Corps' Senior Program Officer for Training and Knowledge Management. And as I said, it is a privilege and an honor to be able to introduce you to our 2020 RSVP competition, which just kicked off about a month ago and is really a wonderful, wonderful time because we get to introduce ourselves to so many potential new people out there in our country and give them an opportunity to join the National Service community and also to welcome and reaffirm and thank so many of the wonderful organizations that have made the National Service community what it is, organizations that have been carrying the banner of CNCS and Senior Corps and RSVP for many years. If you don't know what those terms mean, don't worry, you're in the right place. That's what we're going to talk about here today. But I do like to just start by acknowledging how excited I am to be here with all of you and to share this opportunity with all of you. Before we go too far, I do actually want to direct your attention back to that chat box. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, thanks first of all for saying yes, but now if you could go ahead and just let us know the name of your organization and the state that you're joining from in that chat box. We can actually see your name, so no need to put your name there, just the name of your organization and the state that you are joining from. I really like to see this come in. You see the diversity of folks from all over the country here. Okay, as we see those come in, I've seen Massachusetts and Hawaii and plenty of others, but I think just those two are pretty good polls to show the distribution of folks here from all across the country. That chat box is how you will ask questions here today. So I'm glad we got some practice using it already. Just a couple notes about those questions. First of all, you can ask a question at any time, but note that I might wait to pick up on it until a little bit later. I like to take questions at a few specific times because I often find that I may answer a question through information that I'm sharing otherwise. In addition, there are a handful of types of questions that I won't be able to answer here today. The first couple of kinds of questions that fall into that category are A, if I just don't have the information on hand, or B, if it is too specific to your particular situation or your particular context. We've got, it looks like, a little over 100 folks online here today, and I want to make sure that I get everybody the information that they need. So if you have a question that falls into either of those two categories, there's actually an email address that you can see in the Senior Corps resource links down to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Just scroll down there until you see questions, and that'll take you to 2020RSVP@cns.gov. Once again, that address is 2020RSVP@cns.gov, and that is where you can get additional information and assistance. We do have a number of frequently asked questions already up, and don't worry, I will show you where you can get those. There's another category of questions that I won't be able to answer, and that's because this is a competitive opportunity. So what that means is that we need to make sure that we're treating everybody fairly. So the kinds of questions that I can answer, and no one at CNCS can answer, are things like, well, should I include this in my application or that? You know, feedback on specific things that might give your application an advantage over others, we can't do. Instead, we're going to focus on providing the same information to everybody, and that's what I'll be doing here today. We've got just a couple of more preliminaries to get out of the way before we really dive into the meat of things here today. First of all, just so everyone is aware, this is the first in a series of webinars. It is a series of 10 webinars kicking off today and really continuing for about a month. Every session will be repeated once, and we will post recordings in the same place where you went to register for this webinar after the fact. So if you can't join one, don't worry, you can come back and get that information. That also means that there might be a few questions or topics that I'll say, hey, this is a really important topic. I can provide a little bit of information about it now, but if you want to take a deeper dive, come on back to this particular webinar, to a webinar about, let's say, national performance measures. And then we'll have more time to deal with some of the specifics. One more set of preliminaries before we get too far, and that is that we want to know a little bit about all of you. So if I could go ahead and ask the LSI team who are supporting us, thank you, already on top of it. Let's first see who here has received a federal grant before, including one from the Corporation for National and Community Service. Go ahead and fill that poll out that you see on your screen, and we'll get a sense of folks' familiarity with the federal government. Okay, looks like we've got a pretty good distribution, a little over 2/3 of people. Maybe actually, yeah, about 2/3 of people have received a federal grant before, including one from CNCS. And then about 20% haven't, and there's a few people who aren't sure. Okay, let's go ahead and get the next poll up there. Okay, how well do you know Senior Corps? How well do you know Senior Corps? That is the grant program of the Corporation for National Community Service, of which I am a part and of which RSVP is a part. Go ahead and let us know your answers to that. All right, we've got a really interesting distribution here. It looks like a little under half of our attendees are brand new to the world of Senior Corps. That's fantastic. You're in the right place. We're going to coach you through it. And then we've got about 1/3 of people who are current CNCS grantees and some folks in the middle. That's a really good distribution. Okay, let's go ahead with poll number 3. All right. How would you describe the primary field of your organization? Senior Corps and CNCS and the National Service community are very diverse. We're diverse in lots of different ways, and one of the forms our diversity takes is organizations that have different focuses. Now, we know many of you probably consider yourselves to belong to more than one of these categories, and that's okay too. Just pick the one that you think best describes you. We know it's a little bit arbitrary, but go ahead and pick the one that best describes you. And again, we see the diversity. If there is a leader, it looks like aging comes out on top with about 20%. Oh, sorry, community development is right there with it. And then a pretty even distribution on down the list. Okay, our final question for right now, how did you hear about us? This is just good for us to know, to get a sense of how you all came together here to come and learn alongside us. Take a second and fill out that final poll and let us know how you heard about us. Okay, looks like again we've got about 1/3 of folks who are current grantees. I think we already knew that. And then lots of people coming to us from different directions, including from some of our local partners or affiliate networks. That is great to see. Well, no matter who you are or where you come from, you are welcome here today. Okay, LSI team, thanks for that poll. We can go ahead and get that out of the way here. As we take a look at our agenda. So a lot of what we're going to be doing here today is explaining some of the terms you have already heard me mention. What is the Corporation for National Community Service? What is Senior Corps? And what is RSVP? The specific program for which a grant opportunity is now open. Now, I know many of you know this well, as we just saw many of our current grantees, but hopefully you'll learn a little bit coming through this process too. But at the very beginning, we're going to just establish some basic facts about the competition that's open right now so that everybody is working from the same basic information. And let's dive right into that. First, we are accepting applications now for the RSVP program in specific geographic service areas. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, I'm going to get to that in just a second. Applications are due by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on September 25th, and we have an optional notice of intent to apply that is due by 5 p.m. on August 30th. That process is optional. It just gives us a sense of what to expect. To view available geographies, you're going to look at a document called Appendix A. Now, if you look to the Senior Corps resource links over to the bottom right of your screen, you'll see the very, very top one is called the 2020 RSVP Competition homepage. Throughout the course of today's webinar, I am going to be referring to lots and lots of resources. Most of them are available at that page. And the ones that are not available at that page are available at the links that you see underneath that link. But Appendix A is one of the 2 most important documents related to this competition. And it lists out the specific geographies that are open. The way this program works is certain geographic service areas are open for competition, and they are tied to an amount of funding, a maximum amount of funding that you can request, and a minimum number of unduplicated volunteers that goes with that. A volunteer being unduplicated just means it's a unique individual. Now, that individual could serve with one program in multiple different ways, but you're only going to count that one person once. And if you look at Appendix A, and that's an appendix to a document called the Notice of Funding Opportunity, Notice of Funding Opportunity. If you look at Appendix A to that document, it's going to list out all of the currently available geographic service areas. And it'll look a little bit like this. This isn't exactly what it looks like. I removed one column, tightened it up a little bit for the screen, but it generally looks like this. You're going to see an opportunity number, and by the way, this is actually the first one on there. So this is a real example. You'll see an opportunity number, you'll see an amount, you'll see a number of unduplicated volunteers, and you'll see what's called the quote-unquote areas affected, which we also often call the geographic service area. And that is computed as a package. So when you apply, you will apply for that package of things, a specific geographic service area for no more than a specific amount, and to recruit and maintain no fewer than the specified number of unduplicated volunteers. It is a package deal tying those three things together. Now, one of the most common questions that we get is, well, what if I don't see a particular geographic service area that I am interested in? Well, first of all, there's a lot there. There's there are 228 opportunities in 45 different states on that list, so there's a lot there. But if you don't see what is there, that's because we actually go through this process 3 different times over 3 different years. So some of you may have come and learned alongside us last year when we did this. If you don't see your geographic service area there, the one that you're interested in serving, come on back next year because we will compete the rest of our available geographic service areas then. So if you don't see a particular geography that you're looking for, it may just be because it is not the time to, it is not quite the time to compete for that. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up a couple of examples here that I already see because I think they're relevant to the conversation. Scott asks, if we are not listed there, we cannot apply for the grant. If that is so, can we still become involved with Senior Corps? Great question, Scott. So if the area that you want to serve is not in there, that means that we don't have funding available for that this year. So part number one of the answer is what I already mentioned, which is please do come on back next year because your geographic service area may be available then. If you still do want to go become involved with Senior Corps, I would say continue on for the rest of this webinar because I'm going to show you some resources, including how you can find a list of all of the national service organizations currently available in your state. And as we'll see, a lot of national service programs, and this is very true of Senior Corps and very true of RSVP, are really built on partnership, and there may be opportunities to partner with current existing grantees. Felicia asks, in the example provided, would we need to apply for 179 volunteers? So Felicia, what that means is that in this example, you need to, in your application, you need to commit to having no fewer than 179 individual unduplicated volunteers, right? So they're yours to recruit and maintain and manage, but that's what this is saying. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. So I'm going to hold other questions on that until a little bit later. And Marlene asks, can the same entity apply in 2 different sites as branch entities? Marlene, that is a great question, and I'm going to pick that up a little bit later because we actually address it in the FAQ, and it ties really closely to something that we call local presence, So thanks for that question, Marlene. I'll make sure that we pick that up a little bit later. But for right now, I want to just step ahead a little bit to talk about some of the resources that you will use. Many of your first questions are likely along the lines of what you are seeing on the screen right now. What kinds of projects is CNCS hoping to fund? What information should I include in my application? What is the review process? How long is the award? Are any matching funds required? Things like that. And the vast majority of answers to those questions are included in the document that I've already alluded to called the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The Notice of Funding Opportunity. This is your gateway to the competition. This is your gateway to competition. This means that all of the information that you need will be either available in this document or linked to this document. Apologies for that brief moment of silence. Will be either linked to this document or available in this document. The Notice of Funding Opportunity. That is where you should start. Read it, know it, upside, downside, backwards, forwards. That is the absolutely critical document. You may have noticed on our list of upcoming webinars that the second webinar that we have planned, actually just tomorrow, is a guided tour of that document. A guided tour of that document. But that's not the only resource that's going to be important to all of you. We also have grant application instructions, and that is a step-by-step guide to navigating our electronic grants management system. We have Appendix A, which I've already referred to, and that's the list of available opportunities. We have Appendix B, which explains our national performance measures in depth. That's another topic where we will actually spend a whole webinar later on in this process. I believe that's our third. Actually, no, I'm sorry, I think that's our fourth, the fourth of the 10. We can go back and look at the schedule towards the end of the webinar to make sure. Going in depth on that specific document and your national performance measure requirements, your requirements for measuring your performance. We have work plan development worksheets, which will be very helpful to you in trying to think about how to plan your activities and how you can communicate your plans to us. And then finally, we have a list of frequently asked questions that we do update throughout the process based on what you send to 2020RSVP@cns.gov. All of those resources are available at the 2020 RSVP competition homepage. All of those resources are available at the 2020 competition homepage. So we have limited time here today, but if you don't get information that you're looking for, there's a good chance that it's in one of these resources. And if it's not in one of these resources, again, you can use that additional email address, 2020RSVP@cns.gov. Okay, now that's a lot of preliminaries. So let's go to what we really want to focus on today, the introduction to Senior Corps and CNCS, the Corporation for National and Community Service. Again, if you're already familiar with this, I hope that you'll think of this as a refresher, as a little bit of an opportunity to reflect on what your place in the national service community means to you. And if you're brand new, I am very, very thrilled to have this opportunity to share the work of this unique agency with you. The Corporation for National and Community Service is a federal agency that is responsible for civic engagement, that leads service, volunteering, and grant-making efforts in the United States. We help millions of Americans improve their lives and the lives of their fellow citizens through service. We do that mostly by working hand-in-hand with local partners to tap the ingenuity and can-do spirit of the American people to tackle our country's most pressing challenges. Despite the name, yes, that's right, the Corporation for National and Community Service is a federal agency. We are a small, independent agency, and civic engagement and volunteerism is at the heart of all that we do. And that's why we say we lead service, volunteering, and related grant-making efforts in the United States. We do this through two major programs and a handful of smaller programs. Probably our best-known program is called AmeriCorps. Many of you may be familiar with it. AmeriCorps engages people in service, often for a set period of time, where they often pick up and leave and go somewhere else to serve for that set period of time. People of all ages can serve in different kinds of AmeriCorps programs, but they tend to skew a little bit younger than our program that we'll be talking about in a lot of depth in just a minute, Senior Corps, which is a program specifically geared for volunteers 55 and older. And everything that I talk about for the rest of today really will be focused on Senior Corps. We also have a number of smaller programs, the Volunteer Generation Fund, the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service, and the September 11th Day of Service and Remembrance that you may have come across. So these are all united under the banner of CNCS. I do see that there are some questions about the slides being available. Yes, the slides will be posted with the recording on the same website where where you were able to register for this webinar. And you see Ryan has a question, again, about geographic service areas. I'm going to hold that for just a minute for when we talk more about some of the competition basics. So thank you for these questions, guys. I'm going to keep going on a little bit to sort of paint the picture of the national service community, but I'll pick up those questions to talk a little bit more about the competition mechanics in just a little bit. If you want to learn more about us, if you want to learn more about CNCS, because here I am going to dive into Senior Corps specifically, there are lots of different ways you can do it. You can go to our website. You can look up that resource I already referred to about national service in your state. There's also a link to that particular page in the Senior Corps resource links down to the bottom right. Every state, well, almost every state, sorry, not quite, but almost every state has CNCS staff in it currently, and you can look up their contact information. We are in a bit of a period of transition there where in the near future you might see regional offices, but for right now there are CNCS staff in almost every state, and the states that don't have a staff person in that state do still have someone who's responsible for being the contact, and you can follow us on social media. But where we're going to focus now is Senior Corps, which is the specific branch of the Corporation for National Community Services work that I'm a part of, that I work for, and that is hosting this competition. It is the nation's largest network of older American volunteers, with more than 200,000 volunteers in every state in the country, plus D.C., Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, serving in 23,000 locations. When you add all that up, it is a diverse, vibrant, and powerful community. You can see just some of our favorite stats here on the screen. As I already mentioned, more than 200,000 volunteers all across the country, and serving 50 million hours each year. 50 million hours. They do things like, if you go down to the bottom left-hand corner of that diagram, helping older Americans live independently. It also has positive effects on volunteers themselves. If you want to jump up to that top right corner, 84% of volunteers reporting stable or improving health. And we also are able to focus on priority issues that are really having critical effects on the country right now. And the program we're going to talk about a lot today, RSVP, is maybe best suited for this critical kind of intervention. If you look at that little graphic down there about combating elder abuse and opioid addiction and responding and helping people recover from disaster, both of those things, as we learn, are right up RSVP's wheelhouse and are things that we are going to talk about here today. We've got two other programs that are not RSVP that we don't have funding available for, but we would be remiss if we didn't provide at least a little bit of information about them. The first is the Foster Grandparent Program. This program engages older Americans as role models and mentors to help children with special and exceptional needs. Eligible volunteers in that program may receive a small stipend to defray the cost of serving. It's very similar to the Senior Companion Program, which provides assistance and friendship to adults who have difficulty with daily living tasks, such as shopping or paying bills, helping them remain independent in their homes. And again, eligible volunteers, and when we say eligible in that framework, we're actually talking about a specific income threshold, may receive a small stipend for serving. So those two programs, the Foster Grandparent and Senior Companion programs, are a little bit different than the RSVP program in a few different ways. They've got these specific focuses, right, these specific kind of programmatic focuses, and they have this opportunity for volunteers who are eligible to receive a small stipend. All of these programs are united by engaging people 55 and older in service, and that is really the core of the RSVP program, the program that is now open for competition. It was established in 1971, and it engages people 55 and older in a wide variety of volunteer activities. I like to say, if you can think of a volunteer doing it, there is probably an RSVP volunteer doing it out there right now. It is really built to meet community needs. It is built to be flexible, and to meet the needs of your community. So, among other things, RSVP volunteers tutor children, renovate homes, teach English to immigrants, assist victims of natural disaster, provide independent living services, recruit and manage other volunteers, and I could go on and on and on, because it really is our most flexible and adaptable program. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about how RSVP works. Before we do that, I just want to pause and see if anyone has any questions about anything that we've talked about so far, with the exception of the competition mechanics. So I'm going to hold those questions till the end, because I think once we open that box up, we're going to need to go deep. So does anybody have any questions about the Corporation for National Community Service or Senior Corps outside of the RSVP program before we get into RSVP specifically? Okay, let's go on ahead. So, as I already mentioned, the core of RSVP is engaging individuals 55 and older in service. In a lot of ways, it is a program about connection, about connecting those volunteers to community needs and leveraging them to meet those needs. They serve at what we call volunteer stations in the geographic service area. A volunteer station is a partner organization that hosts RSVP volunteers. We're going to talk about some of these terms in more depth, but right now, actually, I'm going to go and navigate to one of the resources that you see in the Senior Corps resource links box down to the bottom right called Senior Corps Stories, because I think this is the best way to show what RSVP is all about. You're going to see some changes on your screen while I pull this up. Okay, we are here on a public website. You've got the URL in the resource links box. And if you want to learn more about what being a Senior Corps volunteer actually means or how the Senior Corps program actually works in practice, I can't think of any better way to do that than to use some of these resources that we've published and made available online for everybody to learn about Senior Corps. So we don't have time to talk about all of these, and as you may notice, some of them are not about RSVP specifically, but I'm going to highlight just a couple. I'm going to go ahead and open up this RSVP Veterans Coffee House and just briefly read this. The RSVP sponsor, Thames Valley Council for Community Action, opened the first Veterans Coffee House in Killingly, Connecticut in 2015. The coffee house offers a venue for veterans to socialize while providing information on benefits available to veterans and their families. Speakers represent a variety of organizations serving veterans, and I'll let you go ahead and read those. Through connections made at the coffee house, veterans have gained access to additional services and benefits for which they were eligible, including housing, energy, medical, and food assistance. The original coffee house in Killingly is now self-sustaining and operates independently of RSVP. With the support of 14 volunteers, the TVCCA has launched 4 additional coffee houses. From April 2016 to January 2018, a total of 535 veterans have attended. That's just one example, but we can look at one that's slightly different, like John Thompson here. I'm going to jump in. He actually is a veteran himself. He served our country and continues that same love by volunteering in his community. He enjoys visiting with other veterans and travels to the Topeka VA hospital where he can easily strike up a conversation. While he currently volunteers at several local agencies, he really enjoys visiting with the residents at Stony Brook Assisted Living Facility. John was motivated to start visiting residents when he saw the opportunity because he was reminded of his mother, who was a resident before she passed away. He understands and appreciates the value in visiting the residents and becoming their friends. His time with the residents has given John a greater respect for elders and the lessons that can be learned from their wisdom. He's been a volunteer for 9 years. And that's a pretty common. I should find the average volunteer term of service is 8 years. And let's look at just one more. We're going to look at Jim. When asked about his time volunteering in the community, Jim Colliker summed it up best. There's no better place to meet people, caring, happy people who lift me up. He retired early in order to stay home and take care of his wife. He started volunteering because he was looking for flexible options away from home to keep moving. He loves to meet people and help fill a need. He's a retired professor. I'm going to jump down here. He first started working with the Conza Prairie Biological Station in 1978 as a researcher, and now he enjoys assisting with events and environmental programs and was a member of the board for 6 years. During the past 5 years, he has been organizing and managing the parking lot and line of cars for a mobile food pantry. He's also spent the past 9 years working with the VITA program, that's Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, and the state and national organizations related to his work in agricultural and engineering, so using some of his knowledge and skills. So these are just a handful of examples. As you can see, there are many more here. And if you are new to this community, I really recommend taking some time to explore some of these resources because it's the best way to get to know RSVP. You've got lots of different tools that you can do that. So you've got the stories that we just shared, and there's a link to them down in the resource link box. But in that resource link box are a couple of other resources that we don't have time to navigate to and spotlight, but that will still be very helpful to you, including some impact videos. These are great because you get to see programs and volunteers telling their story in their own words. You get to see them in action. So go and view some of those videos. I've alluded to this tool already, but you can also see what is going on in your state, not just in RSVP, not just in Senior Corps, but in all of national service, including AmeriCorps, our colleagues in that side of the house. For the questioner who asked if our organization is not up for, or if our geographic service area, I should say, is not available for application right now, how can I maybe get involved? That is where I would start, because that's where you can see what is already going on in your community, and partnering with an existing organization is a great way to start to get introduced to the work of CNCS and Senior Corps. Finally, we post the results of all of our grant competitions online at the website that you see last on the screen right now. And you can actually go and you can view successful and unsuccessful applications from the past on that site. So that is another great resource to get to know the national service community and RSVP specifically. So now that we've got kind of a picture in our minds, let's get a little bit more technical. We're now going to start to spend some time working with some specific terms and thinking about how all this works in practice, in operation. There are two key terms that you need to know to really understand how RSVP works. The first is a sponsor, which we use as synonymous to a grantee. So that's an organization that receives RSVP funding and is legally responsible for stewarding grant funds. So if you submit an application to this competition, you're going to need someone to sign that to say, yes, I officially accept responsibility for everything that I am saying here. And the organization that has that authority, that's the sponsors. They receive the funding and are legally responsible for stewarding them. And then there's another set of organizations called a station, and that's a community partner where RSVP volunteers serve. You likely saw some of those examples when we were looking, or some of those terms, I should say, when we were just looking at the examples. Now, stations can take a lot of different shapes. They do have to be nonprofit organizations, proprietary healthcare facilities, or public agencies. They have to be organized in some way. They can't just be someone's home. Some sponsors may develop a wide range of stations dispersed throughout a geographic service area. Others may choose to focus on a couple specific stations. I often get asked the question, is there a right number of stations? And there is not. It's all about your program and your community. The sponsor can also be the station itself. So you can have volunteers serve in your own programs if you are the organization applying for funds. The relationship between sponsors and stations is formalized in a memoranda of understanding. And what that really means is you have the grantee or the sponsor that's receiving the funds, and you've got these stations out there in the community. The grantee provides the management of the grant and the volunteers, and the station provides on-site supervision and management, and also some performance data back to the grantee, so that they can then in turn convey that back to us at CNCS. That's all formalized in a memorandum of understanding. If you want to look at it graphically in a slightly different way, I'm big on graphics here. So us here at CNCS and Senior Corps, we provide funds to that sponsoring organization or grantee that then becomes legally responsible for managing those. They go out and recruit volunteers in their community, and they place them at community stations. Now, as we already mentioned, a sponsor can actually place them within its own program. So in this case, the sponsor is serving as the station itself. That is completely allowed. And these are two poles, you might say, two contrasting examples. But of course, you can kind of mix and match. So a sponsor can place volunteers at mostly external stations, but then also have them in one or more programs themselves. If you're starting to think, well, gee, it seems like there's a lot of different ways we can do this, you are absolutely right. That is the idea. Flexibility and responsiveness to local needs is the hallmark of RSVP. That is the key to it all. Having a local presence and having an ability to leverage volunteers to meet community needs, working in partnership with those in your communities. If you're using RSVP volunteers who are 55 and older, to realize outcomes and make a difference, you're on the right track. That's what RSVP is all about. And when you apply for RSVP funds, that is really the guiding mission, what you'll see reflected in all of our application materials, that desire. The specifics are really largely up to you and up to what you think is right for your community. We hope that there are some benefits to organizations that do apply, leveraging volunteers to achieve your mission, building the capacity of your organization, becoming part of a large national network, and strengthening other public and nonprofit agencies in your community. Getting a federal grant is also a great way to demonstrate your competitive programming to other stakeholders. And of course, there are benefits for volunteers. We already saw this in one of the graphics we looked at. They make a real impact. They have an opportunity to gain new friends and connections. RSVP is, again, all about flexibility. There's no minimum or maximum number of hours that volunteers need to serve, and the opportunity can actually make them healthier and happier. While RSVP volunteers are not eligible for a stipend, like those other programs that we talked about at the beginning of the call, they do come with other concrete benefits, like recognition, meals and transportation that occur in conjunction with their service, of course, and some insurance as well. So there are actual concrete benefits available too. Okay, let's take a second and reflect on what we've learned. Go ahead and answer the poll on the screen right now. Okay, let's see what we've got. This one's a little bit trickier, so I'm going to give people a little bit more time to answer it. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got. Again, we've got a pretty even distribution. For this poll, just know you could have chosen more than one response, and I think that probably most people have done that. It looks like the leaders are helping older Americans in my community stay active and engaged, as well as leveraging the power of volunteers to meet a critical community need. And I just want to say that if that's what you all are thinking, that's great, because that's what we're thinking too. That dual purpose really goes to the heart of all of what Senior Court does, providing benefits to the volunteers who are serving while at the same time helping communities meet their needs. Let's go ahead and get our next survey question up for this one. And we'll give you a chance to fill that out. Okay, and let's see what we got. All right, looks like most organizations here today are looking primarily to place volunteers in service opportunities in other organizations, but a pretty good number are either going to be doing both or also having volunteers primarily serving in their own programs. And that totally makes sense. Again, there's no right balance here. There's no cheat sheet or particular number or ratio. It is, again, all about what is right for your community. When you look at the Notice of Funding Opportunity in a future webinar, you'll see that we've got some specific criteria in there that we use to evaluate applications. And that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for any particular kind of organizational structure. We're looking for the specific criteria that you will find in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Okay, let's jump on ahead and keep going. All RSVP grants must measure their performance and report that back to us. And we have a specific system that we use to do that. I'm going to just throw up a little flag here and say that this is one of the most complicated parts of applying for an RSVP grant, and that's why we will talk about it briefly here, but we do have a whole webinar about it planned for later in this cycle. Volunteers can be allocated to two kinds of work plans. National performance measure work plans, which we also sometimes call outcome-based work plans, because they result in specific outputs and outcomes, specific measurable things, or what we call other community priority work plans. That's more of a catch-all for other kinds of activity that don't fit into our specific measures. There is a requirement that applicants must place at least one unduplicated volunteer in work plans for every $1,000 in federal funding that you receive. So what does this mean? In particular, how does this connect to that other amount of unduplicated volunteers that you've seen in Appendix A? Let's spend some time on this. This is not a real example. This is a fictional example, as you may be able to tell. But in Appendix A, you're going to see information that looks a little bit like this for a service area. You'll see state, an opportunity number, a total amount of funding available, start date, a number of unduplicated volunteers, and then this geographic service area. Now, as we already talked about, you can apply for no more than this amount of funding. So in this example, you can apply for no more than $75,000 if you are applying for this particular service area. And if you're doing that, you need to have at least 100 total unduplicated volunteers. But when you look at our requirements, we also have this requirement that you must program at least one unduplicated volunteer in National Performance Measure work plans for every $1,000 in federal funding you receive. So we need to do a little bit of math to reconcile these two things. First, you divide this amount of funding by 1,000, and that gives you 75. And that means if you're applying for this particular service area, you need to program at least 75 unduplicated volunteers in these National Performance Measure work plans. Thank you, Margaret, in the chat box for getting that ahead of that. You need to program your other volunteers, in this case at least 25, right? 100 minus 75 is at least 25, in other community priorities, with no less than 100 total volunteers. So when you add up the number of volunteers you have in National Performance Measures and the number of volunteers you have in other community priorities, you need an amount that is greater than or equal to 100. Now, we've oversimplified this slightly because this 75, that could be 76 if you wanted it to be. It could be 77 or any number all the way up to 100. It's a minimum amount that you need to program in a specific way. And what is that specific way? Well, that's described in depth in these two documents. The specific way is in a way that allows you to measure their impact and report it to us. And why do you need to report it to us? Because we are a federal agency, which means we are actually funded by all of you. You are our bosses. You are the key stakeholders here. And I think we can all understand the need to measure performance and make sure that our investments as taxpayers are getting the bang for the buck that we expect. So you'll see there's a part of the application called a work plan where you spell out what is often called your logic model in the social sector community that ties these things together and results in specific outputs and specific outcomes. Now, we're just barely scratching the surface of this here today, just barely scratching the surface of this here today, and I know that, and there's really no way around that except to come on back when we spend a whole hour just on the topic of performance measurement. I'm actually going to take this opportunity to jump back to our calendar of trainings so that if you want that opportunity, you can make a note of it right now. All right, that's going to be August 27th, and then the content is repeated September 12th, is when we will do a deep dive into this question of performance measurement. It is really, really important, and to be completely honest, that's about all we'll have time to talk about here today. So just know that national performance measures and how you measure performance is really important, and really focus on the requirements that you see in these key documents. Okay, I've got just a little bit of more content to get through, and then we're going to cycle back and pick up some of these questions. Because we are a federal agency, and because this is a federal program, it comes with a certain set of rules and regulations, right? We are working at the pleasure of the American people as expressed through legislation passed by Congress. And that means we need to abide by the expectations of the American people, and those are laid out in a series of rules and regulations, the most important of which is called the Code of Federal Regulations. Those of you who've worked with other federal grants will probably see some familiar information here. There's a particular part of the Code of Federal Regulations that governs the RSVP program. It is 45 CFR 2553. And if you want to go look at it, you can go to ecfr.gov and use that reference. You will also see lots of links and references in those other key documents that I showed you. There's another important part of the Code of Federal Regulations called 2 CFR 200, often called the Uniform Guidance, that governs how you can use the financial side of your grant, That is, by the way, common to all federal agencies, that 2 CFR 200. So if you have another federal grant, it's likely that actually some of those same rules that you use to govern that will be used here. Some particular regulations to highlight: there are certain kinds of restrictions on the kinds of service that volunteers can do. They cannot replace paid staff, they cannot engage in political activity, religious activity, labor or anti-labor activity, and we have a very specific requirement on the kinds of criminal history checks that your staff actually need to go through. So for the RSVP program, this one is related specifically to staff. So read that section of the Notice of Funding Opportunity well, and you'll see this information there, as well as a quote that says, grantees should utilize 2 vendors CNCS has engaged to conduct the required NSCHCs, and a link where you can learn more about that. You want to think about that ahead of time, so that way you can budget for it appropriately and be ready to act on it if you are awarded. I'm going to highlight a couple more things, and then we'll take questions. These are some of the common types of costs that we see in our grant applications. One note is I cannot give you a complete list of everything that you are allowed to apply for. And the reason why is because that is really governed by the uniform guidance here. And there's actually a fair amount of flexibility in it. So these are common things. It's hard to imagine how to support an RSVP grant without a program director, but this is certainly not meant to be an exclusive list. The way the match requirements work is in your first year after getting an award, you are required to match 10% of the total project budget, and then for each of the first 3 years, that increases by 10% until it gets up to 30%. If you are an incumbent, that is, if you are already an RSVP grantee applying for the same service area that you currently serve, then you will be starting at this 30% because you are already there. So for new applicants, you're going to be looking at this sliding scale, but incumbents will be entering at that 30% of the total project budget. Okay, that is all the initial information that I had here. So let's go ahead and take some questions. I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I'm actually going to start with Lisa. Please define unduplicated. Unduplicated means one individual. If you think back to some of the examples that we saw, we heard about some volunteers who served in more than one way or more than one opportunity. So for example, I believe there was one who served in a food pantry and also did some volunteer income tax assistance. So that's just one individual. And for the purposes of your application, you're only going to count that person once as one quote-unquote unduplicated volunteer, even though his activities might be showing up in multiple places, right? He's serving in more than one program, but it's just one individual, one person. And that's what we mean when we say one unduplicated volunteer, an individual person. Kim says, can the unduplicated number of volunteers required include our current volunteers age 55 or older? Or does it need to be all new volunteers? And Kim, the simplest way to answer that question is they need to be RSVP volunteers. So when you get an RSVP grant, there are certain expectations of RSVP volunteers and the kinds of responsibilities that they have and the kinds of benefits that they have. So if they are RSVP volunteers, you do not necessarily need to recruit, or if you have the current volunteers, you don't necessarily need to recruit them as long as they become RSVP volunteers and filter into all of those requirements. For example, serving in work plans that produce national performance measures. I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen for a second because I mentioned that there are frequently asked questions, and this is a good time to highlight them because what I was doing behind the scenes just now was finding this specific question. So it's 7.9. There are a lot of questions here. This is in our first rodeo. We've got lots of questions already answered. Can current volunteers who meet the age requirements be counted as RSVP volunteers as long as they are working on one of the proposed projects? And what we say here is here are the eligibility requirements for an RSVP volunteer. And if they meet those requirements, they can be quote-unquote counted as an RSVP volunteer. So this is in the frequently asked questions. Right, I'm here on our competition homepage, and to get to that document, I went on, here it is, frequently asked questions, and you can find it in here. There's lots and lots of questions here, and most of my answers to the other questions that we've got will honestly be drawing from this document. So know that you've got that resource available to you. Okay, let's see what other questions that we have. Okay. Marlene asks, can the same entity apply in two different sites as branch entities? And Marlene, I'm going to give you an answer that is probably less direct than what you are hoping for, but it goes back to our FAQs because it really depends on the specifics of your setup. So I want to highlight a couple of things. One is the sense of local presence. So if you look at questions 2.6 and 2.7 together, my organization would like to apply for an opportunity listed in Appendix A. We are located outside of the geographic service area. Can we still apply? Yes, however, if awarded, the project must serve the geographic service area exactly as it is described in Appendix A. Additional counties or cities cannot be added. And then you jump down to 2.7, does a legal applicant need to have an address in the county? As specified, the legal applicant must have sufficient local presence to directly manage the proposed grant. The operation of an RSVP grant cannot be delegated to another organization, even if the other organization is an affiliate of the legal applicant. And then I want to highlight one other thing here. Let me find it. Here we go. Is a separate application needed for each opportunity number listed in Appendix A? Yes, applicants may apply to as many opportunities as they wish, provided that they are able to demonstrate sufficient local knowledge, presence, and administrative capacity to successfully sponsor each opportunity. Applicants would need to submit a separate application for each opportunity. So that's a trio of answers, which I know none of them are directly your specific question. But that's because the exact outcome of your specific question kind of depends on some of the specifics. You can imagine different setups of a quote-unquote branch. Is it the same organization? Is it, does it have its own incorporation? Things like that. So if you want more information about your specific situation, you can go ahead and use our mailbox. But generally, you're going to want to apply these general concepts. So one organization can apply for multiple opportunities, but you need to have separate applications for all of them. And there needs to be sufficient local presence for all of them. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay, I know there was another, there you go, another geographic service area question. So Ryan and others are asking, will there be only one chosen grantee per geographic location? So that is actually best answered by the Notice of Funding Opportunity itself. And there is a section there that expels out specifically the selection process. And it doesn't always work out quite that neatly. So generally there is only one RSVP grantee that serves one specific service area, but because of the limitation of funds, we go through a very specific process to identify who actually gets these awards. And that is identified specifically and explained in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And I'm going to even give you the page reference as I look it up here. Okay, it starts on page 14 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It explains the whole process. It explains the whole process. Okay, let's see. I saw someone ask, Arlene asked, how many hours a week are volunteers expected to serve? And Arlene, as I already said, apologies, something jumped up on my screen there. The RSVP program is really about flexibility. So we here at the national level in the Senior Career Office do not have a minimum or maximum number of hours that an RSVP volunteer needs to serve. Now, most organizations will develop their own policies and procedures for that to make sure that they're managing their volunteers in a reasonable way. But we do not have any minimum or maximum standard. Okay, let's see. I know we got a question about a national organization. I hope my answer about the way to put together those different questions about local presence addressed that. If it did not, please go ahead and use the 2020 RSVP mailbox. Okay. Bob asks, why are the required oh, sorry, let me jump up to Ryan's second question. Is there an application process that volunteers have to undergo to become RSVP volunteers? Or if they meet the qualifications, can we automatically count them as RSVP volunteers? So Ryan, again, this is an area where Senior Corps, us here at CNCS, we do not specify, other than having to be 55 and older, a specific process that the volunteers need to go through. However, if you look at our application and if you look at the Notice of Funding Opportunity, you will see the kinds of things that we're evaluating, which is including how you will recruit and manage volunteers. So you do have to tell us your plans to recruit and manage volunteers well, and that does tie into some of our eligibility criteria, but we don't have a specific policy that says you must enroll RSVP volunteers by following steps A, B, C, and D. Barb asks, why are the required numbers of unduplicated volunteers in Appendix A not in line with the available funding amounts at $1,000 per volunteer? Service areas vary in the number of unduplicated volunteers required for the same amount of funding. Barb, that's a great question. Let me jump back to that slide. So first of all, the fact that they are not necessarily aligned is something that we are aware of and is addressed by my chicken scratch on this page, which I apologize for. So there is a general understanding that you don't necessarily need to have all of your volunteers serving in these national performance measures. You can have additional volunteers, in this case up to 25, serving in this what's called other community priorities area that allows them to serve in things that are not measured, that are not subject to our national performance measure requirements. So we are aware of that, and that is kind of baked into the program, right? That allows some additional local flexibility. Now, as to why there's not necessarily the same amount for different numbers of volunteers in different areas, there's a couple of reasons. One reason is, frankly, historical. The RSVP competition is governed by specific laws that say we need to compete things in a specific way. And one of those specific laws says that we actually need to keep these things bundled, and we don't have complete flexibility to change the numbers of amounts. So if something has historically been competed at a particular level, you're likely to see it there at that same level. Now that's kind of a historical analysis, but you can also look at it a different way and say, well, you know what, actually the cost of running a program in one area might be different than the cost of running a program in another area, right? Running a program in a rural area may in fact be more expensive than running the same program with the same number of volunteers in an urban area. I'm just making that up. I don't have specific data to support that, but that might be underlying some of the historic variation that you will see. Okay. Lakshmi asks, and this is going to be our final question. As I said, this is a limited amount of time, and if we did not get to your question here today, please come on back, learn alongside us. We've got lots of other training opportunities, and please use that 2020 RSVP at cns.gov email box. Lakshmi asked, do any division of aging offices have the RSVP program in the past as a direct grantee? There are certainly local offices of aging that have received RSVP and other Senior Corps grants in the past. So that is certainly something that we see. Okay, I do see some chat about specific divisions and specific amounts of funding areas. If I have not answered your question today, it's about that sort of specific level about why this dollar amount is tied to that number of volunteers. And my answer that it is historical and we only have limited ability to change some of these has not satisfied you. By all means, use our 2020 RSVP at cns.gov email address. Okay, if I could ask the LSI team to go ahead and pull over our 2 satisfaction surveys, we are going to go ahead and wind down here. Again, this is just the first of many training opportunities. I want to thank all of you for coming out. You will see 2 questions pop up on your screen right now. Very simple. Just lets us learn a little bit more about how we're doing. Make sure that we're getting you the answers that you need and providing you the information that you want as you navigate this process. I do want to thank you all again one more time because I think this is a really exciting opportunity. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this is one of my favorite things that I get to do. It is an absolute pleasure and an honor to welcome all of you who are new to this world to learn more. We hope we get some applications from some of you. And if you have been contributing to the RSVP community for years, we are so grateful for all that you have done and look forward to having an opportunity to potentially renew that partnership. Okay, that is all for me. Again, a recording will be up. It usually takes a few business days on the same website where you registered for this. And in addition, we've got lots more training opportunities to come. So